We better move on straight away. Prince Charles has made one of his regular warnings, dire warnings about climate change. He thinks it's a crisis, and he's always going on about global warming. He's as bad as Extinction Rebellion. Yeah. He says it's a crisis, it's an emergency. Soda Extinction Rebellion, it's not an emergency, and I don't know why this troublesome royal wants to scare the nation so much. Perhaps he should shut up. Let's ask Dr. Penny Peiser. He's director at the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Hello, Dr. Benny.
Yeah, good evening.
I think Prince Charles is just as bad as Extinction Rebellion, just telling us we should all be in a panic and this is a terrible emergency and oh my God. And today he had the temerity to say it's much more scary, much more important than the COVID or the coronavirus crisis. Right now, people aren't thinking about climate change. Trust me, they're thinking about coronavirus. So I thought Prince Charles's intervention was almost irresponsible, and I don't think he's got the science right.
Well, I don't think anyone is surprised because he's banging on about this issue for the last 20 years, and the world has been banging on for the last 30 years or more. And in a way, he is right to be concerned, not so much about the climate emergency, but about the fact that governments are certainly not doing what he and others have been demanding for decades. CO2 emissions continue to rise quite rapidly, particularly in the developing world. And whatever we are doing is not stopping this rise in CO2 emissions. Of course, the warming isn't as dramatic as many predicted 20 or 30 years ago. It's much slower and much more moderate. But the kind of fear-mongering is relentless and will continue to be relentless.
I mean, the thing is, Benny, you're right. Of course, global warming, climate change, we're all concerned about it. What worries me is just like Extinction Rebellion, Prince Charles likes to depict it as an emergency. I don't believe it's an emergency. Of course,
no, that's right.
We ought to do. We ought.
It's just a new term to scare people. Global warming obviously is a reality. Temperatures have been warming for the last 150 years, but they have been warming very, very slowly, very gradually, and they continue to warm very slowly. There's no acceleration. There's no indication that it's going to get worse. If we had signs that global warming would get worse, then, perhaps it would be justified to be more concerned. But the warming trend over the last 30 years is about half of what was predicted 30 years ago, and it's very, very moderate.
And is it reducing then? Is that what you're saying? I mean, not reducing, but the rate at which is increasing, is that reducing?
Well, it differs from decade to decade. Basically, in the last 20 years, it has been rising less fast than in the 80s and 90s. So basically, the trend in the 80s and 90s, when the alarm started, was faster than the trend in the last 20 years. So in a way, it has decelerated rather than accelerated.
Is that because of actions that people have done?
No. It has nothing to do with the actions, because the CO2 in the atmosphere is still rising. The actions have had no impact on that. The CO2 levels are still rising. What I'm saying is that despite the rising CO2 in the atmosphere, the temperature trend hasn't accelerated.
So is the science wrong then? Is that what you're saying? The science is wrong? No, the science
isn't wrong. The science has always had a spectrum of, it could be at the low end, could be at the high end, and then most scientists said it might be somewhere in the middle. Yeah. So they for the last 40 years, we were told it could be a warming of 1.5 degree if you double CO2, or it could be 4.5 degree warmer. And in actual fact, it looks as if it's more at the lower end. Right. So that is the reality.
And that's because of other variables?
It's because we don't really know. We don't really fully understand the different factors that influence the climate. I mean, the CO2 is certainly a greenhouse gas, and all things being equal contributes to the warming. But there are other factors.
Other factors, yeah.
What we don't need, Benny, what we don't need, in my view, is a member of the royal family stepping outside his remit to warn an already quivering nation that the coming climate crisis, and I quote, will dwarf the impact of coronavirus, and he's urging immediate action to reset the economy to be sustainable and inclusive. This is the talk of emergency, and I don't think it's wise to put people into panic stations.
Yeah. I agree, and I'm even more concerned about his indirect criticism of government policy, which he shouldn't really do.
Well, he shouldn't be doing that anyway.
The government, whether you agree with it or not, I don't, but the government has said that they want to
carbon neutral by 2050. Yeah,
and Prince Charles says it's too late. We can't wait so long. We have to do it.
You're joking. 2050 is bad enough, and I hope this country doesn't try that hard to meet that target, because I think it will be ruinous. But Prince Charles saying we've got to do it earlier, it's all right for him. The rest of us has got lives to lead.
Incidentally, today was an interesting report being published. I don't know whether you saw it, but it said that the 1% wealthiest people in the world are responsible for more CO2 emissions than 50% of the world's poorest.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. By the way, Benny, the royal family are no slouches when it comes to spewing pollution into the air. Yeah. Charles loves to go around by helicopter. Yeah. One guy on a train. He is a great user of carbon. And of course, his brother, Prince Andrew's an absolute disaster when it comes to that. He never goes anywhere unless he's in a private helicopter or a private jet.
He doesn't go anywhere anymore.
Same for Harry, of course. Yeah. So, if you'll pardon me, I don't really want to be lectured by members of the royal family who seem to be conspiring to ruin the atmosphere.
It isn't really the royal family. It's just him and Harry. It isn't. The royal family does the right thing and keeps out of these controversies, and rightly so. And that's how it should be.
Yeah.
I think we have to set the record straight.
So basically what you're saying is they've got the science wrong, and all these people think they're right, and they're arguing on flawed science.
Absolutely, because what they're cherry picking, they're basically saying it's much worse than the scientists think, and it will be a disaster. But that's not what the science says. The science says there's a spectrum of possible outcomes from the low to the high. We don't really know where in these, in this spectrum. For the time being, as I said, it looks more that it will be at the low, that the warming be moderate and not dramatic. That can change, but for the time being, there's no evidence whatsoever that it is changing. And so the science is wrong. People were saying this is an emergency, this is a disaster. That is not scientifically justified.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Benny. Prince Charles, we could do with him stepping out of this debate. We've got enough things to worry about right now without royal people coming in and telling us we're in the middle of some sort of panic-stricken emergency. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Benny Peiser, there, Director of the Global Warming Policy Foundation. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. Over there, that's Ash.
All right, man.
And do you know what this is, Ash?
Yes, it's
the home
of free speech and
common sense.
Yeah.
TalkRadio.